Episode 181, the IPCC report, Farming and Food. This is the World Organic News for the week ending the 12th of August 2019. John Moore reporting. Decarbonise the air, recarbonise the soil. This week we begin with a piece from the ABC News site. The IPCC climate change report calls for urgent overhaul of food production and land management. Quote, "We must urgently revolutionise what we eat, how we grow it, and the way we use land, if the world is to combat dangerous climate change," according to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report published on Thursday. Transforming to clean energy, clean transport and industry alone will not cut global emissions enough to avoid dangerous warming above 1.5 degrees Celsius, the report authors warn. End quote. It's almost as if decarbonising the air isn't enough. Who'd have thunk it? Anyway, the point is we need to change our food production systems. CAFOs, overproduction of vegetables to meet supermarket contracts, and the discarding of perfectly good foodstuffs because they look a bit funny have all got to stop. As a footnote to this last point, one of our local supermarkets was selling, inverted commas, misshapen carrots last month. There'd been talk in the local press about the waste involved in tossing these out. I was interested. My thinking was that if they were not standard, the supermarket would be offering these carrots at a considerable discount to encourage the average shopper to change their behaviours. Imagine my surprise when I checked the per kilo price of these, inverted commas, iffy carrots, with the standards located on the other side of the fruit and veg section. They were in fact more expensive. So clearly the management could say we offered the non-standard carrots and nobody bought them. We are only supplying what the customers want. And it is this sort of double-think nonsense we are up against, and the IPCC report is suggesting we need to change. The kicker from the IPCC report is the need to change food production methods to ensure we don't hit the 2 degrees rise in global temperatures, which would trigger the release of methane trapped in the permafrost. If that happens, the climate consequences for agriculture are catastrophic. Even more droughts, unpredictability, out-of-season frosts, desertification, huge flooding events, and so on. Quote, "Improving land management, reforestation and soil regeneration are essential steps in reducing emissions from the land sector, according to report co-author Annette Cowie from the University of New England, my old alma mater. We really do need to take drastic action urgently to reduce greenhouse gas emissions," Professor Cowie said. "When we plant trees, when we do sustainable land management practices that build organic land and soil, we actually take carbon out of the atmosphere and we store it in the land. Emissions from the global food system, including peripheral activities like packaging and transport, are estimated to comprise between 21% and 37% of the world's human-generated greenhouse gas emissions, according to the report. About a quarter of the Earth's ice-free land area is subject to human-induced degradation, the authors note." End quote. I've mentioned the soil losses and continued degradation of the world's soils in previous episodes. I think we can all see that that's not sustainable. We need to start regenerating what we've got before it's gone. Starting now is easier than trying to roll back the Sahara, but we've got to do that too. In a previous episode, I discussed the Great Green Wall of Africa. There's a link in the show notes if you'd like to read more. It's where countries in Africa are building a 15-kilometre deep, continent-wide tree barrier on the southern edge of the Sahara, which is actually turning back the desert and making the land viable again. One of the issues with current agricultural production is, like the rest of industrialised society, its dependence on oil. Overcoming the supermarket issues above could be done with much shorter supply lines, local growing, less food miles and so on. To follow on from that, our second piece this week from the site The Conversation, entitled IPCC's Land Report Shows the Problem with Farming Based Around Oil, Not Soil, supports this idea and links soil degradation to the ecology of farming, as she has done. Quote, "How is it possible that soils have become so degraded? Don't we need well-functioning soils to produce food? The truth is the modern farming system is based around oil, not soil. For most of human history, humans could only produce as much food as the local ecological and soil conditions could support. Every time a crop was taken from the field, nutrients were removed, making the soil less fertile. To cope, some societies developed complex and sustainable systems, in which the nutrients are returned to the soil in the form of organic waste. Using the local environment and labour to maintain soils in a good state was key to survival. Modern farming, in contrast, has been shaped by the power of fossil fuels. The problem of limited soil fertility was overcome through fertilisation, mainly with synthetic nitrogen, which is made using natural gas or coal. End quote. The complex and sustainable systems referred to in the quote link to a book I've recommended previously, Farmers of 40 Centuries. Covers the trip of a missionary through Japan, Korea and parts of China at the turn of the 20th century. Well worth a read, and there's a link in the show notes. The point being made in the quote is the over-reliance on fossil fuels. If we think about animal agriculture as it's practiced in the US and increasingly elsewhere, we think of CAFOs, confined animal feeding operations or feedlots, both as feedlots for beef cattle and as enormous 1,000-plus cow dairies. Feed is grown with artificial fertilisers, harvested with diesel-powered machinery, trucked in diesel-powered vehicles and fed to animals. Waste is then trucked away or kept on site in huge manure lagoons and then spread by diesel-powered tractors. The food, milk, is shipped to factories on vehicles and then distributed to consumers through warehouses and so on. For meat, the beasts are trucked to slaughterhouses and then through the supply chain, all powered by fossil fuels. Not only is this bad for the climate, the soil and the beasts, it produces bland, homogenised food for humans. The prices of these food are kept low to the consumer because the environmental and health costs are never included in the price. And it's not just industrial ag that's got issues. I've mentioned before the 100-acre farm I visited last year. On some days there must have been at least 9 tractors going full-time for days on end, ploughing, reploughing, moving compost and a variety of other things which made very little sense to me. Busy rather than productive seemed to be the mantra. Anyway, I'm sure a huge systems overhaul is needed to remove the tractors and the hand weeding of triple-ploughed vegetable beeds. The solution there is probably in the problem. Don't plough, direct seed transplant and mulch and the diesel disappears, as do most of the weeds. Cutting silage and hay needed for paddocks that are too wet in winter is another area needing attention. Maybe lighter breeds of cattle, capable of living outdoors all year, that aren't quite as productive as the massive Holstein Friesians, but that doesn't remove the need for motive power for grain harvests. I can't see the world using scythes and rakes. I'm sure there's a solution, I just haven't heard nor seen one yet. Certainly we can all do our bit and improve our own lives in the process by growing some of our veggies at home. Even if we just start off with a herb garden to season our diets, we're making a small difference. The UN, the IPCC, common sense and an unbiased look around will lead us to the same conclusions. Shorter supply lines, fresher food and getting off the fossil fuel addiction are all important. I'm fairly sure we can decarbonise the air. Solar PV, wind, wave and geothermal options are all getting cheaper. And hydrogen is a stopgap or even major slice of the energy mix, and we've got this all sorted, especially when we realise that the price of these things is falling and consumers are happy to put these things in their own homes. The recarbonise the soil part is relatively straightforward. More soil carbon from biochar to compost to vermicompost to cover crops and green manures, and then we can toss in animal manures. I just wonder sometimes why this hasn't happened yet. I'll just let that sit there. Decarbonise the air, recarbonise the soil. Of course, if you'd like to join the movement to recarbonise the soil, or you know someone who is interested, our online conference, RegenEarth 2019 Living Soils, Backyard Regen, would be a great place to start, in my humble opinion. We have over 300 years of accumulated knowledge and experiences from our presenters over the 3 nights of the conference, and all for the mere price of $67 Australian. There are links in the show notes. Thanks for listening, and I'll be back next week.